Hello, everyone, and welcome to Torah. It's great to see you all. So many people already connected. And we have a special class today with Dr. Jerry Katz, who is we are having some technical problems with the link to get him into the stream. So you will have to deal with me for a little longer until we can get Dr. Katz connected to the class. Okay, but it's so great to see so many of you. I'm sorry I missed the beginning of the messages. So the first one I can see here is Shelly Chochinov, that it says Boker Tov all. If you see that you type something before that, that means that I cannot read your message. Sandy Polanski is here, and Marvin is here as well. Rinal Baz is here, Priscilla Kerr. You're very curious. I'm very curious too. Very curious as well. Judy Sharak is here. Jeremy Lupton is here. Ruben Gonzalez and Marcela are here. Bienvenidos. Bienvenidos. Welcome, the two of you. Dr. Debbie Pollack is here as well. So I'm going to disappear for the stream for a minute. Christy is here too. I'm going to disappear for a second to see if I can help Dr. Katz with the link, and I'll be right back. Okay, please be patient. Okay, guys, almost there. Almost there. Give me just a couple of minutes. We are just tweaking. Yeah, you have audio now. You should have audio now. We had a problem before. And I was just talking to Dr. Katz on the phone. That's why I didn't have the audio. Oh, here it is. Here it is.
All right.
Welcome. Welcome, Dr. Katz. Hold on.
Thank you very much.
Now I can hear you. I never wear my headphones for Torah because just me talking, but now I've had to talk to you. So it's so great to see you.
Great to see you.
And now everybody can see you as well. And we have lots of messages. People are so excited and waiting to see what you have to teach us about the skin disease in the Hebrew Bible. But before we go into the class, okay, first, thank you for doing this. Can you tell us a little bit about you?
About me. I grew up in Winnipeg, went to Talmud Torah, suffered 3 times with a cantor brownstone in the choir. Originally, I was going to be 6'2", but he kept hitting me with the yardstick over the head, so I did not grow to be that tall. So I lived in Winnipeg, went to St. John's High School after Talmud Torah, and then on to University of Manitoba, where I got my medical degree, worked for 2 years in emergency at Health Sciences Center, and then Miriam and I moved to Edmonton in 1976, where I practiced family medicine for about 16 years, and then focused on dermatology and cosmetic surgery, doing minimally invasive procedures and skin cancer surgery. I worked for a total of 43 years. I retired in 2017. I've been very active in my synagogue, Beth Shalom in Edmonton. I read Torah, Tzara'at. I blow the shofar. I lead services in Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, and we have a very good life here. My wife Miriam and I will be married 50 years next year, and we have 2 sons and 5 grandchildren.
Wow. And actually, I think you fell short a little bit telling us all about your Jewish knowledge, which is amazing. I remember having discussions with you at your home in Edmonton, and I can testify that your knowledge of Torah, it's really, really amazing. And I'm very excited to, yeah, you see, we have an interesting comment here. You see, Jeremy Lupton said, a Kohen. Dermatology is a great choice for a Kohen.
But I'm not a Kohen. I'm not a Kohen. My father told me when I was very young, never go up as a Kohen. Our family name is not Katz, which means, of course, Kohen Tzedek. And he never knew what our family name was. He thought it might be Kaufman, but we do not go up as Kohanim.
Well, but maybe you, who knows? Who knows? Okay, so we are all very excited, and I will bring your presentation. So whenever you're ready, Doc, the class is yours.
Okay. Now, where are my speaker notes?
Oh, you have to open your PowerPoint.
Okay.
And I will follow you.
All right, very good. Okay.
Shelly Chochinov is asking, should we have our Tanach? No, I don't think, Shelly, you need a Tanach. I think it's going to be self-explanatory. Just let's pay attention. And if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to type it in the chat and I will highlight it. And so we can all talk about that. But it will be probably better if we leave the questions to the end.
Okay.
But
so we can go ahead.
Yes.
So good afternoon, everybody. Greetings to you from here in Edmonton, Alberta. I hope you and your families are all well and coping with life during the pandemic. I want to thank Rabbi Annabelle and Rena for this wonderful opportunity to present some information from the text of the Hebrew Bible that you may not have thought about before and some ramifications on our world today. This afternoon, we're going to talk about skin diseases in the Hebrew Bible. So first of all, a disclaimer. I am not a Bible scholar, just a curious person with a medical background searching for knowledge. This presentation is not exclusive, but rather a bird's eye view. And also, my bias is medical, not religious. And the rabbi will fill in many of the blanks that I will leave open. But I am very interested in this area, particularly from a medical standpoint. Next slide, please. Next slide, yeah. So skin diseases in the Hebrew Bible, we're going to talk about the Bible, the Tanach, of course, the Torah, the teachings, the Nevi'im, the prophets, and the Ketuvim. Next slide, please. So first, a very quick course in dermatology. The skin is the largest organ of our body, and it acts as a barrier between internal organs and the external environment. It's subjected to noxious external agents like chemicals, bacteria, viruses, etc. Next slide. So the skin is divided into 3 distinct layers, and it resembles a bed. The epidermis is this thin sheet on the surface. The dermis is like the blanket, and the subcutaneous tissue is a thick mattress. And each layer has specific functions and diseases. Next slide. Skin diseases are very common. There are more than 3,000 skin conditions that affect humans. Approximately 1 in 3 people have a skin problem of some kind. More than 50% of GP and family physician visits are for care of some skin disease or skin lesion, an abnormality on the skin. It's conceivable people of biblical time had many of the same skin diseases prevalent in biblical geographic areas today. Next slide, please. So now let's turn our attention to biblical texts. And what we're trying to do is to make an educated guess of a disease entity retrospectively based on description in the texts. We're looking at the text now and guessing what the disease was back then. Retrospective diagnosis based on textual descriptions are very difficult. We really need a laboratory confirmation to be sure of the diagnosis. And the golden standard, of course, would be when you have something peculiar you're looking at on the skin, the best thing is a biopsy, which I don't think they had in those days. So the biblical texts are only mention symptoms and signs. They talk about scabs, sores, baldness, itch, boils, scaling skin, white patches, inflammation. Some skin diseases have some symptoms and signs that are similar. So diseases can be confused based on the description. Therefore, it's important to understand the differences between them, and I will give you some examples later. Next slide. A confounding issue is there can be different biblical translations for the same words. The Torah sources translations that I used was the Hertz Chumash, the Eitz Chaim, Sonsino, and Stone. Next slide. So with that preamble, let's look at what the Hebrew biblical texts reveal. Next slide. So we're going to start with shchin, boils. So what is a boil? It's a skin infection caused by the bacterium Staphylococcus or Streptococcus. It starts in a hair follicle or oil gland. Next slide. This is a picture of a boil. At first, the skin turns red in the area of the infection and a tender lump develops. After 4 to 7 days, the lump starts turning white as pus collects under the skin. The most common places for boils to appear are on the face, neck, armpits, shoulders, and buttocks. And when one forms on the eyelid, we call it a sty. Next slide. So, boils or shchin was the 6th plague of Egypt. And if you look in Exodus chapter 9, verse 8, Hashem said to Moses and Aaron, each of you take handfuls of soot from the furnace and let Moses throw it towards the sky in the sight of Pharaoh. It shall become a fine dust over the whole land of Egypt and breaking out in boils on man and beast throughout the land of Egypt. Very apropos since Pesach is around the corner. In Leviticus 13:18, shchin, when the body has a boil on the skin. But if you look in the translation in different of the texts, shchin is translated as inflammation in some and boils in others. In Leviticus 13:19, 20, shchin, and in the place of the boil, there is a white swelling or a reddish white bright spot. Then it shall be shown to the priest, and the priest shall look, and behold, if it appears to be lower than the skin, and the hair on it has turned white, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is the infection of leprosy. It has broken out in the boil. So here they're talking about Tzara'at with a boil on top of it. And the translation in all the texts that I looked at, Shechin was a boil. Next slide, please. In Deuteronomy 28:27, Shechin, in the Tochacha, the curses that will be inflicted on the children of Israel if they do not follow God's commandments. The Lord will strike you with the Egyptian inflammation for the word Shechin. In 2 Kings, verse 20, verse 7, Shechin, then Isaiah said, take a cake of figs, and they took and laid it on the boil, and he, Hezekiah, the 13th king of Judah, recovered. And if you look at the translations for Shechin, it says inflammation in some of the books and boils in some of the others. Next slide, please. In Deuteronomy 28:27, where it says Shechin, I guess this one was a duplicate. I'm sorry. Next slide, please. In Job chapter 2, verse 7, then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and smote Job with Shechin, sore boils, from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. So in Job, it was boils, but some biblical medical scholars question whether Job had boils or scabies. Scabies is a parasitic disease which causes intense itch, often for long periods of time. So the phrase the 7-year itch supposedly comes from scabies infection if it is not treated. Scabies is very common in the Middle East as it is around the world. Next slide, please. We now come to the star of the biblical skin disease show, Tzara'at, or what has been called biblical leprosy. If you look in Leviticus chapters 13 and 14, there is all kinds of information about Tzara'at, which can be very confusing. And our weekly Torah readings, Tazria, which is coming up this Shabbat, and Metzora spend a lot of time discussing about the rules of Tzara'at. Next slide, please. Now, linguistically, there's a similarity of a person afflicted with Tzara'at, Metzora, and one who gossips, Motzi Shem Ra. So scholars and biblical interpreters considered Tzara'at a punishment for sins of slander and malicious gossip. Next slide, please. People believed those affected were being punished by God for sinful behavior. These negative moral associations have persisted throughout history and in many places until today. Next. Now, Leviticus chapters 13 and 14 give physical descriptions of Tzara'at and specific information about the laws pertaining to Tzara'at. So the Kohen, the priest, is the spiritual authority, and he's also the medical authority. He examines and purifies individuals with skin condition Tzara'at, as well as surface discolorations of any clothing, leather, and walls. So they called Tzara'at not only on a person, but also on things. Again, clothing, leather, and walls. The Kohen oversees regulations applying to the unclean, ritually impure, Metzora, the person afflicted with Tzara'at, regarding worship and quarantine, where they had to live outside of the camp, Michutz LaMachaneh. The Talmud in Sifra 63, Tzara'at refers to various types of lesions or stains associated with ritual impurity and occurring on the skin, cloth, leather, or houses. Next. So what really was Tzara'at? We really don't know for sure. Tzara'at probably designated a complex of various infectious and non-infectious skin diseases, white or splotchy bleaching of skin and or hair, scales, scabs, and rashes on the skin, and molds and surface discoloration of clothing, leather, and walls. Next, please. So what are the infectious and non-infectious skin diseases, and what could they have been? Well, white scale on red patches could have been psoriasis. Inflamed red skin could be what we call dermatitis or eczema, inflammation of that skin. Dry white scaling on the skin can also be xerosis, where the skin is very dry. And if it's even more dry, you get dry fish scale-like skin, which we call ichthyosis, like fish. Boils, the furuncle, that's a fancy name for a boil, or you could have a group of boils, which we call carbuncle. And you could have fungus infections of the scalp and body. Next, please. The skin infections we call impetigo. The skin parasites could have been scabies and lice. Loss of pigmentation, where you have white areas of skin, could be vitiligo, or in modern terms, Michael Jackson disease, because he was afflicted with it very badly. Next, please. So what is the Tzara'at leprosy connection? In the year 383 Common Era, biblical scholar Jerome translated the entire Bible into Latin, which was called the Vulgate version. He translated the Hebrew word Tzara'at and the Greek words lepros, for a male with the condition, and lepra, for a female with the condition, into the Latin word leprosy. That's when it started. Next, please. So what are the earliest descriptions of a disease resembling this biblical leprosy? Approximately 1550 BCE, in Egyptian papyrus documents, they have things that are similar to what Tzara'at was described, or leprosy was described. And approximately 600 BCE, there was mentions in Indian writings. Next, please. The earliest descriptions of the disease resembling leprosy, this is also a duplicate, sorry. Next, please. So again, with the Tzara'at leprosy connection, leprosy became commonly accepted in the languages of Western Europe as the translation for Tzara'at. Leprosy, or derivatives leper, lepers, leprous, appear 55 times in the Hebrew Bible and 13 times in the Christian Bible. Next, please. In the Bible, leprosy was a physical ailment, but it also had a spiritual dimension. Rabbi Emil Hirsch, professor of rabbinical literature and philosophy at the University of Chicago, wrote, "There is reason to believe that segregation of lepers was regarded more as a religious ritual ceremonial than a hygienic restriction." So these people being tameh, it's much more of a religious ritual ceremonial. Next, please. Other implications of leprosy. Tzara'at was believed to be a disease inflicted by God upon those who transgressed his laws, punishment for evil thoughts and evil deeds. Every leper mentioned in the Hebrew Bible was afflicted because of some transgression. Next, please. Let's look at the 6 named lepers in the Hebrew Bible, the Tanach. Number 1, Moses in Exodus chapter 4, verses 6 and 7. Moses was considered to have had Tzara'at at least briefly. Moses objects when God tells him to return to Egypt and confront Pharaoh. God tells Moses to put his hand into his cloak, and when he pulls it out again, his hand was covered with scales like snowflakes. When Moses again puts his hand in his cloak, it comes out clean. Next, please. The idea of Tzara'at being divine punishment is clear in this Bible story about Moses' sister Miriam. In Numbers 12, verse 10, ideas of the Tzara'at being divine punishment, when Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses, causing God to descend in a column of cloud to confront them. Now the cloud withdrew from the tent, and there was Miriam stricken with a scaly infection, Tzara'at, white as snow. Moses and Aaron pleaded with God to heal Miriam. God instead banished her to a tent outside the community for 7 days. She was then healed and returned to the community. Next, please. Naaman is the third. He was the Aramean army commander in 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 1. Number 4 was Gehazi, prophet Elisha's servant in 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 20. Number 5 was Joab, King David's nephew, commander in his army, mentioned in 2 Samuel chapter 3, verse 29. And finally, number 6, Uzziah, the king of Judah, mentioned in the 2 Kings chapter 15, verses 32 and 34. Next, please. So in summary, the precise meaning of Tzara'at, biblical leprosy, is still in dispute, but is different than the modern form of what people call leprosy, known as Hansen's disease. So now I'm going to put on my doctor's hat and carry on about modern day leprosy. So Hansen's disease is a chronic disease caused by a slow-growing bacterium, Mycobacterium leprae, from the same distant family as tuberculosis. And this disease is caused by this bacillus, which was named Hansen's bacillus. It was discovered by Norwegian Dr. Armor Hansen in 1873. Now, this bacterium grows very slowly, and it averages up to 5 years to develop symptoms, and up to even 20 years. The bacteria prefer cooler parts of the body. That's why it attacks the human skin and nerves, which are cooler than our regular internal body temperature of 37 degrees centigrade. Next, please. Hansen's disease is transmitted by droplets from the nose and mouth during close and frequent contacts with untreated cases. It's not highly contagious, like influenza or now Omicron, and it's not contagious from skin contact in humans. So you can't get it from touching a person with leprosy, or Hansen's disease, rather. Next, please. So we come up to transmission from wild armadillos. Mycobacterium leprae is found on the skin, meat, and blood of wild armadillos. They have a cooler body temperature of 34 degrees, which is perfect for this bacterium. In 2018, the international team, led by researchers from Colorado State University, found that human contact with wild armadillos, including cleaning and eating the meat, contributed to extremely high infection rates with the bacterium M. leprae and cases of Hansen's disease in Para district in the Brazilian Amazon. Brazil has about 25,000 cases of Hansen's disease per year. So contact with the blood and meat of wild armadillos can transmit this organism. This is the 9-banded armadillo, which is referred to as poor man's pork or Hoover's hog. Interestingly, I find this interesting. I'll read that to you. Let's go back. During the Great Depression, the armadillos were hunted for their meat in East Texas, where it was known as the poor man's pork or Hoover's hog, by the people who considered President Herbert Hoover to be responsible for the Depression. Earlier, German settlers in Texas would often refer to the armadillo as Panzerschwein, which means an armored pig. Next, please. So Hansen's disease mainly affects the skin, the peripheral nerves, the nasal lining, and eyes. And it's circular flat skin lesions with color changes. They can be lighter, darker, dry, or flaking. Next, please. There can be discolored patches of skin that are usually flat, but they may be numb. And this is a very important hallmark of Hansen's disease, or as people call it, modern day leprosy, which we'll refute a little later on. But it involves the nerves, and the areas of these lesions could be numb. Next, please. So this is what Hansen's disease looks like. Here you can see the flat discolored patches of skin that may be numb and look faded, lighter than the skin around. Next, please. They can be growths or nodules on the skin, thick, stiff, or dry skin, painless ulcers on the soles of the feet, painless swelling or lumps on the face or earlobes, loss of eyebrows or eyelashes. Next, please. But the hallmark of Hansen's disease lesions is loss of feeling because of involvement of peripheral nerves. Loss of feeling is not mentioned in any biblical texts. Next, please. Now, delayed diagnosis and treatment can lead to serious complications, which can include disfigurement, hair loss of the eyebrows, eyelashes, muscle weakness, permanent nerve damage in the arms and legs. Next, please. Inability to use your hands and feet, nasal congestion and nosebleeds, collapse of the nasal septum. And that's why you have these horrendous pictures of people where they have no nose, and you have this terrible spot of their face with this hole where their nose used to be. Sorry, folks. But one of the things it could end up in is also blindness. Next, please. Now, this is completely curable, completing a multi-drug therapy depending upon the stage of disease when the treatment starts. A combination of antibiotics which lasts 1 to 2 years, using 2 or 3 antibiotics at a time. And it can be dapsone, rifampicin, clofazimine. Strategy helps prevent the development of antibiotic resistance by bacteria. That's why in certain diseases, the same with tuberculosis, they use multiple drugs because you have to take it over a very long period of time and helping to prevent bacterial resistance. So let's talk about epidemiology. That's a buzzword now, especially in the times of COVID. So epidemiology refers to the distribution of the disease, the dynamics of the disease in a population. Let's look at the statistics of Hansen's disease. Next, please. Number of cases worldwide continues to fall. Parts of the world where Hansen's disease is more common: India, Brazil, Indonesia, Africa, and the Western Pacific region. Next, please. So what's the world epidemiology of this modern day leprosy? In 2015, 94% of the new cases were confined to 14 countries. In 2019, there were 202,000 new cases, 60% in India, 13% Brazil, 8% in Indonesia. The World Health Organization global estimate, there are 2 to 3 million people living with Hansen's disease and related disabilities. Next, please. So what about Hansen's disease in Canada? An estimated 2 to 10 cases diagnosed in Canada each year, and immigrants from India, Indonesia, and the Philippines or Myanmar. And I have to say that in my 43 years of experience, I diagnosed one case of Hansen's disease in a new immigrant from India. And she had very dark skin, and she presented with this very dark nodule, a bump on her leg, which she had. And she thought that it was growing in size. Looking at it, I couldn't be sure what it was. So I biopsied it, and I was quite surprised to get the diagnosis of Hansen's disease. And she went on the triple medication, and I was supposed that she cleared up because she had to be on it for 1 to 2 years, and she was lost to follow-up. So let's go to the next slide. In the United States, there's about 150 to 250 cases diagnosed each year. And most cases in people born outside the country who were infected before arriving, about 85%, and 47% in Asian or South Pacific Islanders. But most of the cases are in Texas, Louisiana, Florida, Arkansas, California, Hawaii, and New York. Next, please. You cannot speak historically of people with leprosy facing isolation and discrimination without mentioning so-called leper colonies or leprosaria. Believe it or not, Canada had these as well. Sheldrake Island in New Brunswick was a leper colony or a leprosarium for between 1844 and 1849. Tracadie Island in New Brunswick, 1849, all the way to 1965. And the Darcy Island, Gulf Islands in British Columbia, leprosarium, 1891 to 1906. Next, please. The leper colonies in the U.S. In Kalaupapa, the Hawaiian island of Molokai, not to be mixed up with Mordechai, had about 8,000 people over 150 years. 16 people still alive in 2015. 6 still sequestered between the ages of 73 to 92. The Pekingese Island and Buzzards Bay off the coast of Massachusetts, 1905 to 1921. And the Carville National Leprosarium, Carville, Louisiana, 1894 to 2015. Next, please. So I wanted to talk about a Canadian case report. In 2014, a 69-year-old non-immigrant retired farmer from Nova Scotia. He had a 10-month history of a non-scaly circular areas over his trunk and extremities. Only travel that he had consisted of yearly visits to Davenport, Florida, in the United States, where he went for the past 8 years. He had no contact with animals, including armadillos, or with persons with similar lesions. He'd always lived in Nova Scotia, and he never employed foreign workers. Next, please. His first biopsy was negative, but 10 months after the disease of the onset, they did a second biopsy doing genetic material analysis, and they were able to isolate Mycobacterium leprae, the organism of Hansen's disease. And he had armadillo-associated genotype, and he had no recollection of having any contact with armadillos. But they warned travelers to the southern United States to avoid contact with armadillos. So we have no idea how this man contracted this disease, but obviously he came in contact with something that transmitted the disease with the organism. Next, please. Some last thoughts about Hansen's disease. Hansen's disease was feared as a highly contagious, devastating disease and referred to as leprosy in modern times. The truth is, Hansen's disease is very hard to spread and is treatable. The stigma and prejudice remains about this disease. We have to fight the stigma with education and improving access to treatment. Hansen's disease patients face isolation and discrimination. Next, please. So, in summary, leprosy terrified humanity since ancient times. It was considered a curse of God and associated with sin. Hansen's disease has been referred to as modern day leprosy. Hansen's disease is still a major health problem in many parts of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Next, please. The Tzara'at condition described as leprosy in the Hebrew Bible is not the same as Hansen's disease. No mention in the biblical text of numbness or lack of sensation, which can afflict people with Hansen's disease. Tzara'at description in the Bible is more likely to be vitiligo, white patches, or other forms of what we call leukoderma, skin whiteness, or psoriasis. Next, please. This is vitiligo. It's a complete loss of melanin, which is pigment in our skin or in our hair. So you can see the well-demarcated areas of whiteness. And next, please. This is vitiligo. You can see it on the back of the neck and whiteness in the hair. And if you look into the biblical text, it talks about seeing white hair, patches of white hair, distinct from a person's other. You're one slide ahead of me. There we go. Okay, can we go ahead to the next one, please? So this is psoriasis, and it's thought to be an immune system problem that causes the skin to regenerate at a faster rate than normal. This is the most common type of psoriasis, where you have the reddened area below and then the thick white patch with scale. And if you rub that scale off, it will bleed. So the take-home message, we can only speculate what the skin diseases in biblical times were. Leprosy, that term should no longer be used because of the negative connotations of moral transgressions, resulting in social ostracism of people afflicted with this condition. We should use the term Hansen's disease. Thank you very much for your attention. Yeah, we don't need that slide.
Okay. That was actually fascinating. As you say, was a dermatology course in 45 minutes. And I bet you had to go to school to have the same kind of information for so many years. And we got it in 45 minutes. So it's fascinating, and it kept me thinking about all the references of what we call leprosy in the Torah, and why they will never mention some of the symptoms that you presented, like the numbness, for example. Why do you think that's it? That they never experienced leprosy? Because they had to, right? It has to be some of the cases that they were leprosy.
Well, remember, our biggest problem is we're looking backwards. And it's very hard because we have no clinical evidence. We have nothing in front of us. They did mention many things in the Bible about the symptoms as I listed there. The scabs, the redness, the white patches of hair, the white patches on the skin, etc. So it did describe symptoms, but it did not describe anything like numbness. Wow. So the big question is, was Tzara'at the same as Hansen's disease, which we have now? And most medical biblical scholars would say no. It's more in keeping with vitiligo or psoriasis.
But vitiligo is something that isn't that something that most people will be born with that?
No, most people develop it's an immune-based condition where you have your immune system attacking your pigmented cells.
Huh. Look, we have some comments here from Denise. Let's see what she says. It's interesting because we have armadillos in our area in Austin, Texas. I never knew they were associated with Hansen's disease.
Yeah,
So,
and Texas has the highest rate of Hansen's disease related to armadillos in the United States.
so in other words, if you see an armadillo run away,
Yeah, take off. You don't want, that's just like never smile at a crocodile. Just leave an armadillo behind.
oh, yeah, I remember knowing people in Argentina in the countryside that they actually eat it. Yeah, I know that. And then they make these little guitars with the shell of the armadillo that they call it
Exactly.
charango.
Yeah.
It's a charango, and it's part of the folk music in Argentina. You cannot separate the two. So I even play with armadillos in the past. When you try to touch them, they would close up and they would come. They will make like a ball.
So if I can mention, we just read Shmini not that long ago, and thank God the rules of kashrut forbid us from eating armadillos. So it saves us nachamo from getting Hansen's disease, just like not eating pigs saved people, especially in ancient time, from getting trichinosis.
Yeah, I still want to know why we eat chickens, because if you ever seen the way they all the disease from chicken, but that's interesting that I when I became a rabbi, before you finish the course, you need to write an essay. My essay was on the Tzara'at Jews, which was the group of Jews who rejected the Talmud, and they don't eat chicken because they are not 100% sure that the chicken is not listed within the forbidden birds in the Torah. It was fascinating because they said, hey, many of the birds listed there, we don't know what they are anymore. We don't know the translation. And then the rabbis say, well, but we do know how we call the chickens. But we don't know if the name mentioned in the Torah is maybe like a major category for all the birds that we call chicken and things. So it's hey, who knows?
I just want to answer a question. Jeremy asked, what is a white patch beneath the skin? We're not sure what that means. In modern times, a white patch beneath the skin, well, it wouldn't be what we call vitiligo, because vitiligo is a surface problem. What may have been a white patch, it may have been pus that may have accumulated below the skin in an ulceration. Ulcers, of course, are beneath the skin. They go below the skin, and it may have been pus that accumulated. I don't know. I've never seen anything like that in my medical experience, but we don't know what it means. Remember, we're looking backwards, trying to make a diagnosis now in something that happened back then. Tough to do.
Yeah, and it's also it was probably because they couldn't really tell the difference between many different diseases, because they couldn't biopsy anything back in the day. So they would have.
And then of course you had the Kohen, who had a very tough business because he probably learned from another Kohen about the skin diseases and things like that, or things that make people tameh, impure. And so what would be interesting is that that's an onerous job, because you have the ritual and then you have this requirement to medically look at these people and make some kind of priestly diagnosis. Very tough.
I was just studying about that. In fact, I'm writing an article now for the magazine at the Share Zedek, and I'm talking specifically about that, and how when God said to the Kohen that they have to examine the lesion, it repeats within the same verse, it repeated twice. But it says, the first time you look at the lesion, the second time you look at the person. Right? So you have to realize that one word will change the life of whoever you have in front of you. So you have to look at the lesion, but you have to look at the person.
Right.
You have a person in front of you, so be careful of what you do. which is very interesting. And sometimes, and you're probably familiar with this, and how sometimes doctors forget that they have a person in front of them, right? It's not just numbers on a chart.
Right. I'm going to answer a couple of questions here. One from Denise. Good question. Was cystic acne mistaken for a curse, or was it on the same level as a carbuncle? So a carbuncle is a grouping of these large boils, right? And those are coming out of hair follicles. Acne is a disease of sebaceous glands, so the pathology is different. Now, perhaps people may have red bumps on their skin, and they may have had acne, because I'm sure they had acne at that time as well. And it may have been mistaken for some kind of impurity by the Kohen. Now, another question from Shelley. Psoriasis may be, is that rheumatoid arthritis that you got, RA? But, okay, it's not rheumatoid arthritis. Psoriasis causes psoriatic arthritis, which is another kind of arthritic condition, but it is not the same as rheumatoid arthritis. They're all autoimmune problems, and they are treated a lot with biologics these days.
Huh. Interesting. And it's also interesting that in the Torah, sometimes some people will recover. And it was a whole ritual of people who recovered from it, right? So it's kind of difficult to imagine that it was leprosy. And if the Torah is mentioning that people recover and they have to go through this ritual to come back to the camp, how is that possible? So I guess it's another hint that they are talking to a different disease. Right? If you have, what is it, Hansen disease, you need antibiotics. Otherwise, can you cure it naturally?
Right.
You cannot, right?
Right.
So it's a.
But again, I think in the Torah they use hyperbole. Like, for instance, when they describe Moses putting his hand in his garment, pulling it out, and it's white like snow, and putting it back in, pulling it back out, and it's clear. No medical condition will clear that fast. So I think this is hyperbole. And somebody whoever is putting the Torah together has written this as a, I think, hyperbole. There can't be any kind of disease. And somebody has asked me, has my careful scientific study given you doubts about Torah and faith?
That's Judge Rocky Pollack.
Okay. Well, I think being a thinking person, I think you always have doubts, and especially if you have you're looking scientifically at things, you have doubts about what's going on in the Torah, and I think a lot of it is hyperbole, and I don't take it literally. I take it seriously. And there's some things that you have problems with. Like, for instance, I wish that they would finally be able to find some really good, strong evidence about the Exodus. There were 600,000 people plus more, and they had to leave something behind. But we still believe in Yetziat Mitzrayim, you know.
Yeah, it's about what the Torah teaches. The best way that I could put it together is the Torah might not be factual, but it's still truth. Right? The Torah teaches a truth, but it might not be factual. That's the way I process it. There are two different things, facts and truth. The message of the Torah is truth. Now, the facts may not. And we have another interesting question here by also Denise. Shingles. Did they have shingles back then?
It's possible. I mean, that virus is not new. It's the same as the chickenpox virus, right? So the residual aches and pains from shingles are not really an autoimmune response. It's an inflammatory response, because shingles attacks the nerves, and that residual inflammation can last, as you know, weeks and sometimes months. And I know people in my practice who had post-herpetic neuralgia rather, which is the residual pain for life. So it's an inflammation after the infection.
And we have one more question here from Jeremy. How is the comparison between seborrheic dermatitis and Tzara'at?
Well, seborrheic dermatitis is very, very common, particularly when you perspire and in areas where you have skin folds. So I'm sure that they probably had seborrheic dermatitis, but it tends to form a yellow scale on a bed of redness. Often there's erythema or redness, and it has more of a yellow type of scale, yellowish white. I suppose it might be mistaken for Tzara'at if you had enough white scale there. But again, we're not knowing because we're not back there looking at the patient, if you know it, or at the individual. So will gabapentin treat the pain from shingles? In some people. Nothing works for everybody.
Yeah, I discovered that. Well,
interesting, I have to tell you that some people have found, I used to do a lot of injection of Botox, both for cosmetic purposes and non-cosmetic purposes, using it for migraine headache, hyperhidrosis, excessive sweating, etc., etc. And some people have done Botox injections along the area where the nerve root is, where the person has pain. So if the patient has pain on their face, they could inject it in certain areas. This is not a common treatment. It's off-label, and don't go around saying that everybody should get treated with Botox. But some people have used it and have had some result, but it's certainly not a regular treatment. The pain from shingles is awful. And of course, I can only say that I hope everybody here over 50 has had their Shingrix shot.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Katz. It's great to see you again. And I learned a lot. I'm pretty sure all the students, all the participants of Torah L'Chaim also benefited with your words. And for everybody who is watching, remember, if you missed any part of the class, we are restreaming the recording of this tonight at 8 p.m. Central Time. So don't worry if you missed it. You can watch it again. And I believe you are teaching again soon, right? Is it on
yes,
April 13th?
I gave a class last night on Israeli medical inventions and discoveries. That was part 1 last evening. And I'm doing the next part 2 on the 13th at 7:30 your time. And I'll be doing parts 3 and 4 in November.
Oh, fantastic. 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 So thank you again for joining us. Thank you for teaching us today. And thank you everyone for watching. And remember, if you like the class, please give us a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channels, and if you're on YouTube, also hit the bell so you will be notified every time we go live or every time we upload something to our platform. Everybody is giving you the Yashir Koyak, doctor, and I joined their sentiments, saying that it was an amazing class, and also it's a very interesting preparation for Pesach because boils were part of the makot, of the plagues. So I'm pretty sure we have something new to share in our own Sidarim. And we can even quote you this time. And we can be a vehicle to teach actually something different this year at our Pesach table. So when we ask, why is this night different from all other nights? Well, because we have new information from Dr. Katz this year. That's why it's so different. So thank you so much for joining us. And again, everyone, you can visit our website, is at winnipeg.ca. You will have more information about Dr. Jerry Katz's coming up classes. So I hope you're going to join him. Thank you again, Doc.
Thank you, everybody.
I hope to see you
soon in person.
Everyone. Thank you. Chag Sameach to you. And bye, everyone. Remember, stay safe. Hope to see you soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.